Hello and welcome to the agenda. I am Ajay Kaul. In this program today we will be discussing about the implications of historical accord reached between Israel and UAE. What was unthinkable has happened. After 49 years of animosity, Israel and influential Arab country United Arab Emirates have decided to establish normal diplomatic relations. The historical development was announced after trilateral talks via video conference between US President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. UAE is the first Gulf country to normalize relations with Israel. This development is going to have huge implications on Middle East and elsewhere in the world. In the agenda today, we will discuss what implications this development will have. To discuss this topic, we have with us Ambassador Dr. Deepak Vora, who is a former diplomat and foreign affairs expert, and Dr. Wael Awad, who is a senior journalist and expert on West Asia. But before we start the discussion, let us have a look at this small report.
Influential Gulf country United Arab Emirates and Israel have reached a historic agreement on establishing full diplomatic relations. The development was announced after talks between US President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. This ends decades of animosity between the two countries and sets stage for them to work together in various fields, including security and trade and investment. According to a joint statement issued by the US under the deal, Israel will suspend declaration sovereignty over areas outlined in the president's vision for peace and focus its efforts now on expanding ties with other countries in the Arab and Muslim world. In the coming weeks, delegations from Israel and UAE will meet to sign agreements in a number of areas, including security, energy, investment, tourism, aviation, and technology. The joint statement said Israel and UAE will also work with the US to push its strategic agenda for the Middle East. After the announcement, bin Zayed said Israel will stop further annexations of the Palestine territories, and UAE and Israel agreed to cooperations and setting a roadmap towards establishing a bilateral relationship. Netanyahu later told journalists that he agreed to delay the annexations as a part of the deal with the UAE, but the plans remained on the table. He said the agreement ushers in a new era of peace between Israel and the Arab world. He described it as the greatest advancement towards peace between Israel and the Arab world in the last 26 years. However, the deal has been slammed by Palestinian leadership, terming it as a betrayal. The right-wing Jewish settlers in the West Bank also expressed anger over the deal, saying they have been deceived as Netanyahu had promised to apply Israeli sovereignty over the areas they are in. However, some Arab countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Oman welcomed the development. Notwithstanding the diverse reactions, the deal is landmark and its implication will be felt not only in the Middle East but elsewhere in the world too. Bureau Report.
So let's welcome our guests. My first question is to Dr. Awad. Dr. Awad, how do you see this unexpected development?
Yeah, good afternoon to you and your distinguished guest. The fact of the matter is that this relation between UAE and Israel is not new. Actually, it has been there for almost a decade, and it has been under the table for some time, where from time to time we hear about a delegation from Israel visiting Abu Dhabi or participating in the renewable energy or any other of the trade or global trade. So therefore, they kept it, concealed those relations till this moment came. So I think the timing of it's not much to change the actual bonding between the two countries, but it is a fact just to serve President Donald Trump in his election campaign till November. We are trying desperately to gain publicity among the right wing and the Israeli Jewish lobby inside the U.S. So this is going to help him and help also in some way Mr. Netanyahu. As a prime minister, he's also facing lots of charges against him. So therefore, it is just the timing. Otherwise, the relation has been there for some time.
As you said that it will help Donald Trump and it will help Netanyahu, but how does UAE gain by coming out in the open? As you said, they have been doing dealings in a concealed manner, but now coming out in the open and daring to come out in the open among all the Muslim countries, how big is that?
See, unfortunately, this will have a big ramification on the Palestinian issue and the global pictures, because most of the Arab countries have taken a position that boycotting Israel products and also banning any kind of relation with Israel, as long as Israel does not abide by the international laws and UN Security Council resolution in this regard 242-338, which speaks of a coexisting Palestinian state next to Israel and within the territories of the occupied territory of 1967. So all this have not been achieved. So therefore, the Arab maintain this distance with Israel, despite the fact that Egypt has made a treaty with Israel, more than 40 years ago, and also then followed by Jordan and the Palestinian and Oslo. But none of these treaties have really yielded any result for the Palestinian who is still under occupation. And if I may show you this map, I think you will understand what I'm trying to say in my talk, because this is a very interesting to look at this yellow color map. This is what was Palestine prior to 1947, and gradually Israel annihilated the whole of Palestine, and those dots were already there on the map of it was Israeli ghettos. Now this turned out to be a full Israel, and those yellow dots become a Palestine. So therefore, Palestinians have lost their territories, and they're only negotiating 12% of the remaining of Palestine, which has been given to them 50% or 45% of the UN Security Council resolution, which is 1947. So therefore, Israel is expanding at the cost of the Palestinians. So when an Arab country comes and break peace with Israel, on what basis? If you are talking of a bilateral relation, fair enough. But if you're talking of a Palestinian issue, I think that is going to be a negative impact. Nevertheless, the Palestinians themselves also have said that this kind of sabotage or betrayal by the UAE is not going to have much effect on the resistance of the Palestinians till they achieve their objective. So therefore, it could be a first step, in fact, because there are lots of pressure on most of the GCC countries. And you can see Saudi Arabia will follow suit, and maybe Bahrain will follow, and there is also Oman could be also the fourth country to follow on the same line. So therefore, it just bringing those kind of relation to the open and giving some kind of a boost and morale to both the failing President of the United States and Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, I understand the Palestinian leadership is angry and upset over this. I'll come back to you on that, but I want to now ask the Ambassador Vora about. So, how do you see this development, which will have huge ramifications?
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole, for this opportunity to learn from you and from your other very distinguished guest, whom I know well and whose views I greatly respect. First of all, this normalization between the UAE and Israel was to be expected. 3 years ago, an Israeli minister acknowledged that we have ties that are indeed partly covert with many Muslim and Arab countries, and usually we are the party that is not ashamed. Give me just a moment, sir, and I'd like to explain why I say this. This deal brokered by the USA is in keeping with changing times. For 45 years after the end of the Second World War, we had the Cold War, which was a clash of ideologies and fossilized mindsets. It was a war of wars, fought by proxy all over the world. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. We had this period of American triumphalism, which I call not a Cold War, but a hot peace. And with the turn of the millennium, sir, Islamic radicalism became public enemy number one. Nobody had time to think about anything else. And a new phrase entered the international lexicon: suicide bombings. And the Palestinians, sir, were responsible to a very large extent for introducing this business about hijacking, suicide bombing, etc. in international affairs. With due respect and apologies to my colleagues, sir. This is the age of compromise and realism. Hardline ideologies, frozen narratives, ossified mindsets are becoming irrelevant. Let me put it to you very bluntly. The world is tired of the Palestinians, sir. As someone has said every time, in fact, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, said that the Palestinians should either accept a peace deal or shut up. He said this 2 years ago in an interview in the United States. He also said the Jews are our brothers. We don't have a problem with them. And a Saudi senior official last year said, if Iran clobbers us or tries to interfere with us, Israelis will fly our planes to beat the hell out of the Iranians. Sir, the common enemy at this time for the UAE, for Israel, is Iran. And it didn't help that they flew their drones and unleashed their missiles on the Saudi oil production facility last year. So what the UAE has done, normalizing with Israel and thereby, shall I use the term, earning favor with the United States and the West, all of which have welcomed this peace deal, the UAE is ensuring its own security, sir.
So, Dr. Awad, as Ambassador Vora said, so is UAE moving towards USA and Israel because of Iran?
Well, definitely there is a new alliance forming up, but I fully agree with Ambassador Vora. It's not that we are against the Jews. The Jews are our cousin. Actually, we are just separated from the same father. Somebody went for Islam and one went for the Jewish. So we are all brothers. We are from the same family. But what I'm trying to understand here is a very simple message. Are they the Palestinians should abandon their land and give the Israelis the right of existence and not the Palestinian state within their own homeland? I think this is the question here. Either we respect the UN Charter and UN Security Council resolution on this regard, that we don't leave it for certain countries where we are seeing, like UAE or Saudi Arabia, to dictate what the cause of a people have been struggling for 55 years under occupation. It's not easy for a nation to fight, like this.
Dr. Vora, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia had told Palestinians to accept the peace deal or shut up. So do you think Saudi Arabia and maybe countries like Bahrain and Oman will also follow suit?
There is no question about it, sir. For how long can these countries keep their security hostage to an issue that nobody is interested in anymore, the Palestinian issue? Of course, the Palestinians should get their state or whatever. 2 years ago, Mohammed bin Salman, and sir, he is a leader of the Islamic world, the Arab world in his own right. He had said the Jewish people have a right to a nation state of their own next to a Palestinian state. This was in an interview in the United States. And he said something very interesting. He said the Iranian supreme leader makes Hitler look good. I mean, the kind of animosity that he had for Iran and vice versa came across. When President Trump says this is truly a historical moment, he's referring to the fact, sir, that religion and genetics is no longer a marker in international affairs. This is going to have very serious repercussions for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and for the Arab League. So what if you are Arab? Does this mean I support you blindly in everything? So what if you are Muslim? Does this mean that I shut my eyes to whatever you're doing and support you? No, sir, not any longer. The times are changing.
So do you think, I believe that the whole global geopolitics is changing amidst COVID. So do you think, like Pakistan recently attacked OIC, now OIC countries, member countries are taking a different direction. So are you seeing a change in the OIC also?
No question about this, sir. Now we have a much better diplomatic environment. Oman and Bahrain, as you know, they support the UAE, so we'll be on the right side when it comes to dealing with nations with large Indian diaspora. Secondly, sir, I am personally convinced that soon Saudi Arabia will establish diplomatic relations with Israel. It has no reason to stay away. and take the opportunity to improve its relations with the United States and with the West. You know, there was all this talk about Wahhabism and how the Saudis had been financing terrorism, and those characters who brought down the Twin Towers 20 years ago in the United States, that they had very strong Saudi connection. Saudi Arabia wants to distance itself now from the historical evidence of the past, from the frozen narratives of the past, from the fossilized mindsets of the past. So what we are seeing is that if Saudi Arabia also recognizes Israel, then it will bring stability to the region. Sir, they understand, the Arabs understand, that if Iran starts messing around, the first responder in the region will be Israel. That is why they are normalizing. Pakistan, sir, when you talked about OIC, yes, of course it's in a desperate situation. The OIC doesn't care about Kashmir anymore, sir. They are tired. There is Kashmir fatigue. The donor list of funds that Pakistan has been taking for running its terror factory is drying up very fast. I mean, the treaty between the UAE and Israel clearly suggests that the Arab world and the OIC and their important leaders are done with the Palestinian and Kashmir issues. That's it. Enough, guys. Now let's move ahead. I believe this treaty signifies that. And may I just say something else, sir? All these years we kept our relationship with Israel in abeyance because of our commitment to the so-called Palestinian cause, sir. Even though our relationship with Israel, as some scholars have said, goes back 3,000 years, to the time of King Solomon or whatever. But the Arabs, what did we get, sir? They were not our loyal friends. They towed the Pakistani line on Kashmir in OIC, but they began treating us with much greater respect. Funnily enough, we did not normalize with Israel because we said the Arabs will be angry. But once we normalized, they began to treat us with more respect because we also normalized with the West. So this is what I want to say, sir. The Arabs now share intelligence with us on jihadi groups like the Israelis. I mean, they have been deporting chaps we want. 20 years ago, you remember a character called Dawood Ibrahim used to strut around in Dubai pretending that no one could touch him. Well, maybe at that time no one could. Now he dare not step out of his hole in Pakistan because he'll be grabbed and put on the first flight to India. Times are a-changing, sir. We must recognize this.
So, Doctor, our times are changing. The Muslim world stood unitedly on this Palestinian cause. Now, do you think cracks are emerging in that Muslim world and maybe the Palestinian cause may be taking a backseat?
The Islamic world, the Arab countries are really distancing themselves, the leaders, from the public. So therefore, any country which they do not represent their people, you will find leaders, corrupted leaders, who is falling on this line. Because at the end of the day, as I said, we are one from the same father, the Jewish and the Muslims. So we live under one umbrella and from the same blood. It's just a matter of that we cannot make one annihilate the others and because one have the right of existence and the other one does not have the right of existence, does not work anymore. So therefore, the Arab divided, yes, the Arab house is divided, the Islamic world is divided. But what we are concerned is more of the Palestinian. The Palestinian struggle will continue irrespective whether UAE or the whole GCC fall in the hand of the American, under the American pressure to open relation. Look at Egypt. After even 40 years of relation with Israel, there is nothing moved on the table. It's just a formal relation. There is no peace as such. There is nobody even can integrate themselves with the Egyptian. It is similar with the Jordanian also, where you will have the same problem. It's not the matter that we do not want peace. It's a matter that other side does not want peace. If a prime minister of a country does not recognize the existence of Palestinian, that doesn't mean that Palestine is not there. Even if Google remove it, it doesn't mean Palestine is not there. Palestine is in the heart of every Arab citizen, of every human being, because it is injustice done to the Palestinian for the last of the 60 years, and even before the existence of UN has come to existence. It has the first resolution was of dividing Palestine unequivocally between two countries, and they have given the right of Israel to take 55% of a minority of a majority Palestinian. And now we want me to justify such kind of an action by UAE because UAE is normalizing relation with Israel. It is a fact of the matter, if there is somebody does not want peace, We are the people who are suffering. Our land is under occupation. Lebanon land is under occupation. And Palestinians are under occupation. If you want peace, you give back the territories and stick to the UN Charter and UN Security Council. Everybody wants peace. So therefore, when Emirates and the Saudi Arabia are talking of normalization of relation, it is a matter between the two countries. But when they start suffering, they will realize that this kind of relation is just meant to serve the American and the Israeli hegemony in the region. What's happening is they are trying to make an alliance against Iran because they have already created a monster which the Americans have tried to make after 1979. They have made Iran as a monster and against the territories. But I can tell you and let our distinguished guest, my dear friend, Ambassador Bora will agree with me that for the last 300 or 400 years, I haven't seen any invasion by Iran of any country. So to create a monster, and you say that there is a monster sabotaging peace in the region, at the end of the day, it is Bahrain who's killing their own people. It is Yemeni who they're killing the Saudis and the Emiratis. It is the Syrian who are dying. So who are paying the price? The people of the land, and Iran is just leaving as it is. So therefore, American actually and the Israelis' agenda is being implemented and not the Arab agenda.
So Dr. Awad, as you said earlier, that Netanyahu will benefit domestically from this deal. But I read reports that even the hardliners, right-wingers in Israel are unhappy, and so are the Palestinians. So it doesn't serve, I think, well for Netanyahu as far as right-wingers are considered.
No, I think, Ajay, what happened is that the the UAE have said that we have made this normalization of deal with Israel because Israel have installed the annexation of the West Bank and the Jordanian Valley. But then the right wing who are supporting the government, these basically the whole government of Netanyahu and based on the settlers. And those right wing settlers does not believe even in a Palestinian inside their territory. So they don't want to leave this territory. They want to annex it. They wanted to take it fully under their own control. So therefore, even Netanyahu, he have said that we are normalizing relation with the UAE, but not at the cost of the annexation. The process of annexation will continue. As I said, it is his Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, and his daughter, and the ambassador of the United States, David Filtman, in Israel, are the one who is orchestrating all this show to help Netanyahu, who has already been prosecuted by the court in Israel. And also his coalition is a very shamble. So therefore, he is also at the mercy of the settlers. So there is no question about it.
But I think Netanyahu has said that the annexation is on hold. Still on table, but on hold.
No, absolutely not. He will continue. Netanyahu is not a man of peace. Everybody knows. And I interviewed Yasser Arafat, and I asked him in his first tenure of Netanyahu, he said, what do you expect from him? He said, nothing. And when I asked even the same question to Mahmoud Abbas when I interviewed him, I said, what do you expect from Netanyahu? He said, talk for talk. So the Palestinian leader knew themselves that there is no question of peace or no question of Palestinian state or two-state solution under Netanyahu. I don't understand why they have to continue, and now we have to blame others why you are joining hands with Israel. It is a fact of the matter that the Palestinians will continue their struggle. That's my take on this issue.
Okay, let me ask Dr. Vora. As Dr. Awad said that Iran has been made out to be a monster, and it's only US, the world sees Iran through the eyes of US. Is it true?
Dr. Awad, I totally respect your judgment and your views, and you will forgive me for saying what I'm going to say, that in international affairs, you need a major event or a common threat to induce tectonic changes. Not too long ago, an Iranian president said, Israel does not have the right to exist. Let us obliterate it. No, sir. This kind of stuff is unacceptable in our day and age. Whatever his meaning, whatever subsequent justifications we gave, Israel has no legal right to exist. It has a moral right to exist, a human right to exist. That doesn't make any sense. Secondly, when you try and hit Saudi Arabia where it hurts the most in its oil-producing underbelly, you are introducing a brand new element in the regional equation. Sir, in the Middle East, may I submit to you with due respect, your values and goals other than peace have been more important than anything else. You've talked of honor, kinship, loyalty, etc., etc. No one really was interested in peace. It had become an industry. Now the first steps have been taken to bring about stability. Sir, I have dealt with Palestinians. I was posted in Tunis. I have interacted with them in Jordan.
There is a price
It has to be paid for peace when a tectonic shift takes place. Some will be unhappy, some will think otherwise. You can't please all the people all the time.
Sorry to interrupt you, but explain to me what peace you are talking about. What kind of peace are you talking about? Let me just understand this.
means the absence of war.
The absence of violence, the absence of conflict.
Okay, I'm happy about that. But what about the Palestinian rights?
I have said exactly this to you, sir, that my heart goes. I understand totally what you are saying, but one issue cannot allow
region being in turmoil.
Sir, in my own country with my neighbor,
about a place called Kashmir, you've been there. That became his raison d'etre. Everything was Kashmir, Kashmir, Kashmir. When we talked about climate change, he said Kashmir. When I said there's flooding, he said Kashmir. When I said there is agricultural issues, there is Kashmir. You cannot allow your relationship to be hostage to one issue. The world has to move beyond that, sir. Please, not too long ago.
Okay,
you know,
okay, Dr. Vora, we are running out of time. Maybe Dr. Awad wants to say something briefly.
I just don't want to link Kashmir to Palestine at any stage. Any mistake of linking the two issues, it's actually a historical blunder. Kashmir has nothing to do. Kashmir is an integral part of India, and India is a victim of separation, of colonization. Similar is the Palestinian, only under terms of creating a state at the cost of other states. Different issue. Please, I do not want these two issues to be linked together at any stage, because this will cause harm to the Palestinian more than it is for the Indian and Pakistan.
Okay, thank you so much for both of you for participating in this debate. This is all in the agenda today. Thanks for watching. I will be back with another important topic tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.